In a world gone mad, only rationality and common sense can save it. It's Andrew and Jerry Save the World with your hosts, Andrew Langer and Jerry Rogers. And now, here's Andrew and Jerry.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Andrew and Jerry Save the World, episode 35. Andrew and Jerry Throw a Flag. I am Andrew Langer.
Jerry Rogers.
And I'm using my radio voice here that, once again, as I always do today. We got a jam-packed show. We're going to be joined in a little bit by Tim Graham, who is the executive director of NewsBusters at the Media Research Center. We're calling this Andrew and Jerry Throw a Flag or Throw the Flag because we are throwing a flag on the concept of spiking and slow walking. It's an issue that Jerry and I have been discussing quite a bit between the two of us over the last few weeks, this idea of the media ignoring stories and spiking stories or slow walking stories like the potential freight rail strike. We're going to get into this in a second. But Jerry, I want to start here because we talked yesterday. I mean, you and
I talked yesterday?
Yes, we did several times. But
I think we talked this morning as well.
Yes, we did. I almost called this show Andrew and Jerry Are Top of Mind. And I want to ask you, because we can play the clips if you want, but have you?
Yes, I think we should play the clips because let's put this in context. The president of the United States yesterday was hosting a White House conference on food insecurity. By the way, how the media led up to this conference, the Washington Post, New York Times, other venues all said that Biden to solve hunger crisis.
Yeah, yes, of course.
It was like he was some kind of messiah coming down from the mountain to finally fix our problems in poverty and homelessness and hunger. But regardless, then they had this big pre-event or memorial for this congresswoman who had passed away. And then the president starts asking where this woman is.
So let me play the clip. And I will tell you something, Jerry, again, getting back to what you and I have talked about in the past. Before I retweeted this, I went back and I wanted to make sure that this was from yesterday, that it was a real clip, that it was not from an earlier meeting that he'd had before Congresswoman Jackie Walorski died. Wait,
before you play it, you did more to confirm and clarify your tweet than most reporters do when they are filing a story.
Except for we're going to get into what the White House had to say yesterday. So here's the president yesterday morning.
Representative Jackie, are you here? Where's Jackie? I didn't think she was going to be here to help make this a reality.
So he is clearly talking about Congresswoman Jackie Walorski.
And by the way, the reason why he cut himself short there was because he probably is unable to pronounce her last name.
Oh, yes. So obviously this raised an issue, and reporters, and this goes on. In fact, it goes on so long, this thread that Curtis Houck put out, Curtis Houck from Media Research Center, NewsBusters. We're going to have his colleague Tim Graham on in a few minutes. I was playing this so much that my wife had me stop because it just got to this. So here is Cecilia Vega asking Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, about she had the first question on this.
Final one. What happened in the hunger event today? The president appeared to look around the room for an audience member, a member of Congress who passed away last month. He seemed to indicate she might be in the room. What happened?
So the president was, as you all know, you guys were watching today's event, a very important event on food insecurity. The president was naming the congressional champions on this issue and was acknowledging her incredible work. He had already planned to welcome the Congresswoman's family to the White House on Friday. There will be a bill signing in her honor this coming Friday. So, of course, she was on his mind. She was of top of mind for the...
She was of top of mind Jerry, is that a phrase you've ever heard before? I've never heard that phrase before.
Well, I've heard the phrase top of mind.
Top of mind.
Sure, but
she's on her mind, at the forefront of her mind. And we go ahead, because I'm going to scroll
top
down.
Of mind. But here's the thing, too. It's an awkward situation for the White House, again, because it was absolutely clear that this woman had passed away, because they celebrated her prior to the president. So they have this short memorial, or this nod to her, right? And then he's on the stage looking for her.
Yeah. So here is CBS Radio News's Stephen Portnoy also asking about this. Hold on, let me pause this. So he asks about this. There are several other follow-ups here, but he goes back and because I want to get to the thing that really just angered me about this exchange. But this is a legitimate question. This is an important question to ask. And eventually EWTN Eyewitness, the Catholic channel, I think it is.
Yeah.
The woman got very pointed and was like, we need to know if the president has cognitive abilities here. So Stephen Portnoy asked this question.
I have to do this, but I'm compelled to ask you to go one more time back to the question about Congresswoman Walorski.
I'm not sure why. Why one more time?
Frankly, honestly, I think the memory of the Congresswoman and history requires some clarity here.
So he asks, she dismisses and says, well, why? I don't know why. And then she goes on and she says that they're jumping to conclusions. And then, hold on, I want to go down to James Rosen from Newsmax ask a question. And this is the response that just angered me incredibly. Hold on. All right. And for those of you who can't hear it, he basically asks about, he says, I have John Lennon on my mind every day.
I have John Lennon top of mind just about every day, but I'm not looking around for him anywhere.
When you sign a bill for John Lennon as president, then we can have this conversation.
I mean, that I got to tell you, that
I'm not even sure. What did she say? When you sign a bill,
when you sign a bill, right? When you sign a bill for John Lennon, or John Lennon as president, whatever. When you become president of the United States and you sign a bill for John Lennon, then you can ask that question. Which is,
well, look, I have no sympathy or empathy for the media, because it is obvious that Joe Biden is not at full capacity, at full mental capacity. And yet the media, for a year in the 2020 election, they hid this.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this is the point that I made, and this was my hot take, and I know we're not big fans of hot takes here, but this was my hot take. Because I've been trying to compare it to, I originally compared it to Orwellian language. There is no war in East Asia. You can also, I suppose, compare it to The Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. But what Karine Jean-Pierre was trying to do was engage in the Jedi mind trick, right? Literally trying to repeat the lie so many times and say the same phrase. She was a top of mind. You will love this. It is much better than Cats. You'll go and see it again and again.
And why shouldn't she do that? Because up until today, and it'll continue throughout the year and through history, the media falls for these things, not because they're tricked, but rather because they want to promote a certain ideology, a certain viewpoint.
Right. And once again, it comes back to, can you imagine, right? You had that situation where Donald Trump was slow, was a short stepping up a ramp, and they said he was in cognitive decline. If Donald Trump had called out a late member of Congress from the podium at an event, you would have the clarion call would be Donald Trump needs to,
and again, you're right.
He needs to take a cognitive. You need to take a cognitive test.
But here's the thing: if this was a one-off, it's not a big deal. But for 2 years now, this president has just made up things. He has created entities and events. He has misremembered. He has fallen down. He has stumbled. He has looked confused. I mean, last week he was giving a talk, and then left the podium and was completely lost.
Right.
He looked like an elderly man who got out of his nursing home.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
I'm not being, I'm not overstating here. On 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago, he reiterated again, changed U.S. policy again when it comes to Taiwan.
Right. Right. And then they had to walk it back. And it's, you know, it is a situation where, right, Karine Jean-Pierre is ill-equipped to handle this. Right. You know, and it's a situation where it
doesn't matter because the media will give her a pass and give her a pass.
Well, this is what we're going to get into with Tim Graham. We're going to talk about this issue, and let's sort of set the table here, as we said. So we have issues of spiking, and let's you and me.
The media spikes a story, doesn't cover it.
Yes.
The sin of omission.
Right. The sin of omission. The idea of major media not reporting on the story of the 30 FBI agents showing up at the home of the pro-life activist, and arresting him on a crime that is apparently not, is certainly not, or it's debatable whether it is a federal crime.
And also, he had been charged under this statute, and it was thrown out. This was the feds picking it up after Pennsylvania
and picking it up despite the fact that that the federal courts within the district, because remember, right, you have precedents that apply nationally, when the Supreme Court rules on something, but then you have precedents that apply in an appellate district, right, at the or circuit, and then you have a precedent that applies in a particular federal district, the federal district court for Pennsylvania. And as clear as the controlling case law goes regarding the FACE Act, right? Because this is the act that he was charged under,
right?
Which is
blocking
your law,
this federal statute that doesn't allow for the blocking of an abortion clinic. But here's the thing, too. The reason why it was thrown out was simple. He wasn't blocking access to an abortion clinic.
Well, no. He wasn't charged. No. Let's be really clear here. He wasn't charged at the state level. At least I don't think he was charged at the state level or at the local level, right? Because he was just charged with assault, and they threw out the assault charge.
Okay.
And because assault is a particular crime, and there are issues of intent, and the circumstances, and given what the guy, how the guy was harassing this activist's son, the DA said, something where a pox on both their houses.
But he's being charged now with the federal statute, but here's the thing, and we'll talk about this with Tim in a minute. The thing is that he wasn't breaking the federal statute,
and that's my point. Is that you can listen? You can debate this, right? If there's been no case regarding the FACE Act and regarding the specific kinds of circumstances that are at work here, right? You could have that debate, right? But we now understand that in the federal district where they're in, the controlling precedent, right?
Yes.
Remember, the left is all about stare decisis. I got into this. Man, I got into this with Tom Schaller, that professor at UMBC, about another issue.
But make your point, though. Your point is that under precedent, what this pro-life advocate did not break the law.
Was not a violation of the Federal FACE Act, the thing.
And regardless, Merrick Garland's DOJ sent 30 armed agents with guns drawn at 7 a.m. To arrest this man, even though his lawyers had said, look, if you're going to charge him, we think the charge is not applicable.
Sorry.
However, he will turn himself in.
Yes, that's exactly right. He will appear. You don't have to go down this road if you're going to.
This is plain and simple political persecution. And where is the news media, which is why we have our
political persecution at a time when they're they're grasping at straws to keep the abortion issue alive going into the midterm elections as it's all beginning, right? It's all about narrative building. Tell you what, let's go to our we're gonna be joined in just a second by Tim Graham from NewsBusters, the Media Research Center. And now it's time for our segment called Expert Advice.
Expert Advice.
Well, welcome to our Expert Advice segment. So glad we can bring our guest on today. His name is Tim Graham. He is the executive editor, I'm sorry, not just a mere editor, the executive editor of NewsBusters, which is a project of the Media Research Center. He's actually been someone who's been in D.C. or in and around D.C. longer than me and Jerry and I have. Tim, welcome to the show. So glad you could join us today.
Yeah, thank you. Executive editor might be one of those titles of people who worked here in the 80s.
Yes, sure. I like that.
I think, look, we have some editors and writers and authors who listen to our show. Andrew, you just said mere editor.
Yes.
Yes. So I guess I'm just a mere editor.
Well, Jerry, keep in mind, remember that the way it works, and I'm gonna do a backhanded ding here, Tim. And I don't mean this. Remember, Jerry, the more important you are, the fewer words there are in your title. So.
Yeah, that's why I'm on my radio show. I'm just Jerry.
Yeah, but Tim, you're also the host of the NewsBusters podcast at MRC, which is a great podcast, and we're so excited. We were thrilled to have you join us today. Let's start here because Jerry and I teed this up, and the way we do this is we start talking about issues, and then we bring on an expert to tell us what's really going on.
Because we have no idea.
Yeah, the author Arno Dvorshkov, and I think every sentence should begin with, as the author Arno Dvorshkov said, he wrote a book called The Spike. He was an editor of he was a reporter, maybe an editor at Newsweek.
A mere editor
at Newsweek. He is one of the first people to bring into popular lexicon the concept of spiking stories. And Jerry and I have become deeply concerned at the media, both spiking stories to shape the narrative, but also slow walking stories, like the story of the railroad, the freight rail strike, which none of us heard about until it was on top of us. Talk about how the popular perception of both slow walking and spiking has changed over the last 30 years.
Well, I mean, some things are eternal, and gosh, we hate to sound like this is a conspiracy, but generally news stories surface when the Democrats want them to surface.
Yes.
I'm not sure how exactly that happens because we don't get their text messages like, the Mark Meadows text messages. I want Rachel Maddow's text messages so we know how this actually operates.
We saw a little bit of it, right, with the Steele dossier when that came to light. We saw how things got manipulated. But one of the things Jerry and I were literally just talking about was this arrest of the pro-life activist by the FBI. And I pointed out that the timing, abortion is the driving issue for the Democrat base going into the midterms. And this just happens to happen at the start of early voting. I mean, this is what we're talking about, isn't it?
Except that it's not exactly a story the liberal media is doing.
Well, yes,
right.
It's probably pleasing to liberals when they hear conservatives complain about it. This is what we call, that's a Fox News story.
Oh, sure.
This is how they dismiss things. This is how Democrats talk Democrat reporters off of stories. The Hunter Biden laptop, that's a New York Post story. They talk about slow walking a story, maybe by 2022, we'll do a report that acknowledges it's real.
Yes. Yeah. Jerry, go ahead. You were going to say something.
The Pennsylvania story is troubling because, again, and Andrew and I talk about this on the podcast, but also, in other venues. It shouldn't make a difference if you're a Democrat, Republican, conservative, or progressive when the Department of Justice sends 30, 40 armed agents to your home for at best for troublesome. He didn't break the law, and his lawyers were negotiating with the government for him to turn himself in if they wrongly charged him. And I don't understand, where are the civil libertarians talking about a 7 a.m. raid, children in the home, and again, guns drawn? I mean, this is just, it's outrageous, and this should be the story the past several days, but it's not.
Well, if the American Civil Liberties Union was anything like it used to be,
Sure.
then they would at least be alarmed by it. I think that once again, it certainly follows that if you found it outrageous that they raided Mar-a-Lago,
Of course,
for some documents that were in a closet, once again, that were being negotiated about, this feeds a narrative, and that is, every time the Democrats are in power, one of the myths that erupts is, oh, well, now the Department of Justice is going to be much less partisan than when the Republicans are in power. And then when incredibly obvious evidence surfaces, the partisanship of the Justice Department, they just assume at all times that it's above board. And I think the timing of the Mar-a-Lago raid, where it was like, well, in between House January 6 hearings, we're going to we'll count 4 weeks this way and 4 weeks the other way, and go boom. Just so CNN and MSNBC and the newspapers have something to obsess over for another 4 weeks. It smells. And this obviously is much worse than that, because yes, somebody who shoves a clinic escort, who is hassling his 12-year-old kid, that just, what kind of bad, crazy episode of FBI is that?
It really has more to do with the absurdities of Curb Your Enthusiasm, right? You can see the situation in which Larry David is all of a sudden facing a federal case. Of course, the Republicans would have to be in charge for something like that to happen. Let's shift our gears for a second, because we have the breaking story. Jerry and I talked about this in the first segment of the show, talking about the President Biden yesterday at the hunger, and this, of course, the headlines reading, President Biden solves hunger, as Jerry pointed out to me.
The media leading up to, so a reminder to our audience, but so Tim knows as well. I'm the editor, not mere editor, but the editor over at Real Clear Health, and so we've been covering this conference and the lead up to the conference on hunger and food insecurity, and of course we curate. And so I'm looking at the media coverage, and how the Times, the Washington Post, and other venues were reporting on the lead up was as if Joe Biden is this messiah, and he is coming down the mountain,
right? He's
to solve poverty and hunger, and
he's going to create all the loaves and fishes. Feed the masses.
I was amazed by it, and so and even the commentary that we were receiving, the original op-eds that, hey, a submission for Real Clear, the same thing. It was like Joe Biden takes politics out of hunger. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is outrageous. But anyway, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, no, but the point is that then Joe Biden gets up there. He has this massive brain flummox and starts incanting for a dead member of Congress. And the media, well, first of all, it starts with the White House narrative, but this is what we're talking about. I mean, the overall story is Joe, and a story that has been spiked, is Joe Biden's mental fitness, right? I mean, this is what we're talking. Talk about this in the context of yesterday's story.
Yeah, I think the Washington Post had a story that basically suggested, I only saw this on Twitter, that this was the first White House summit on hunger in a long time. And I'm like, Michelle Obama?
Yes.
I mean, and maybe Trump had one. But look, I am not the biggest fan of the idea that they need to force the 25th Amendment on Biden. But the comedy here is they did that to Trump constantly.
Right.
They constantly suggested he was mentally unfit. Brian Stelter, I think, had a weekly segment on reliable sources for Trump Mental Unfitness Watch.
Yeah.
And they just skipped this. So I came in this morning and I said, let's look at not just, I mean, I knew already the evening shows didn't have it last night. That can take time for Katie Couric has breast cancer,
yes,
or something, but they don't have time for Biden's gaffes, which is kind of eternal. And when they cover Biden's gaffes, it's, oh, Joe, he's so charming. Grandpa, that's one of the, I mean, that's certainly what they did when he was vice president.
Sure.
Uncle Joe, isn't he charming? But I said, let's look at the late night comedy. Did the late night comedy get to this? Because Jimmy Fallon ought to be having a field day with this.
Sure.
And it wasn't. We found Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah actually took it on and mocked it and said, well, this is a good thing because Biden's still, worrying about Osama bin Laden. So one comedian did take it on. Greg Gutfeld was off last night. They decided breaking news, hurricane, let's not do comedy. So we should make sure, I'm sure that Greg Gutfeld would have had good fun with this if he had a show. And if he has a show tonight, I'm sure that'll be right there. But even now, most of the news to us feels like, who's president? Because there's so much more Trump scandal than there is Biden scandal.
Sure.
There's still Trump gaffes, and or at least Trump Truth Social tweets, and no Biden gaffes. And so it is one of those things where they very typically are covering for Joe on a regular basis.
Well, it's like another version of what we saw during the 8 years of Obama, right? The Obama administration is the most scandal-free administration, and you're sitting here going, wait, what? No. But then you go down to, and part of the problem then becomes in these stories that are spiked, it's not just about the proximate narrative or the immediate narrative, but it's also about the long term. History is written by the victors, and your daily newspaper is the most immediate version of history.
Sure.
If those stories don't get corrected, it used to be, I'm sorry, to sort of take it back, right? The Clintons probably refined this tactic, which is story comes up, stall. Then there's an investigation. And by the time it comes around to the hard questions being asked, oh, I thought we dealt with that months ago. How come you're bringing this up now? Well, the answer is because you stalled for so many years. I mean, let me add to
sorry,
this. Go ahead, Jerry.
And I want Tim's response. So, because the media lies and how they report on an issue does become the fact. And I'll give you an example. So, going back several years, the whole thing in Charlottesville, with Donald Trump saying there were good people on both sides, or whatever he said. I remember at the time kind of, believing this because it was so widely reported. And I'm thinking, how could he say this? And then I went back and I looked at the transcript. I looked at the video and the audio, and I'm like, this isn't at all what happened. And I started to bring on my radio show those who had reported on it, and then just played it and read it to them. And they were like, well, there must be something. No, nothing's missing here. But today, if you ask even a center-right person about that, they will give you the media narrative as truth. But what do you think, Tim?
Yes, I think one of the things that we would try to say if somebody said, well, what are sort of the dominant theme at NewsBusters or at the Media Research Center that we would want people to know, and that is, when the news media says they are the first draft of history, ignore the book. I mean, it's you hope and dream that we have historians who aren't all Michael Beschloss on Twitter, who can look back on things with some kind of distance, but you do always think about the way these things are seen in the big picture. And you certainly can say, I can say as a fairly obsessive Clinton watcher, I literally have a bookcase of Clinton books in my home, of pro and anti. There's so many things about the Clintons that, today's voters have no idea. Right. You start babbling about Whitewater and they have no idea what you're talking about. So yes, the first draft of history of Clinton is screwed the intern. It's all history today, or at least popular history, is driven not just by the media. It's driven by terrible Showtime documentaries, Saturday Night Live. Sarah Palin apparently said, I can see Russia from my house. People believe that. And you just,
and then Sarah Palin compounds it by appearing at the SNL 40th anniversary show, talking about running for president with Donald Trump as a running mate. And it's just, it helps to sort of compound this. Let's talk about how this has changed and been refined over time. You know, you've been at the Media Research Center since 1989. You've seen the sweep of all of this. How have things changed? Actually,
how have it gotten worse?
Well, yes, but I want to. That's my point. But within the context of what Jennifer Rubin, the so-called conservative, I'm using air quotes for those of you listening, Jennifer Rubin writing last week, the so-called conservative columnist of the Washington Post, saying that the media can no longer be objective. Well, okay, thank you for saying the quiet part out loud, but it hasn't been objective for a while. Is that the real change? Is it now they're unabashedly, partisan?
There was definitely a paradigm shift with the arrival of Donald Trump. It is changed so dramatically in that when I started here, we had a monthly newsletter. It was like hanging out in a research library. We had lots of time to formulate our thoughts, and to do studies of a 2 or 3 week period of coverage or whatever. But and we were recording everything on VCRs,
Yeah.
And so the pace has increased so much. Part of also what became because of Trump was just journalist Twitter.
Yes.
And leftist Twitter driving journalism.
Yeah.
These are phenomena that have certainly absolutely intensified the American public's contempt for what the news media produces. And when Donald Trump called them fake news, obviously we watch lots of news here. Lots of it isn't false or fake, but what it is, so much of the news today is public relations. It's publicity. It's Biden saving the children today with the hunger summit.
Right.
Yeah.
That feels like fake news if you don't like Joe Biden. If you're a Republican voter, it feels like Pravda. And that's what's comical is these people will say, well, Fox News is state-run TV. Well, what on earth are you when the Democrats are in charge? Were you not state-run TV under Obama? Oh, but there were actually 12 of us networks that were state-run TV, so it's not state-run TV. I mean, they don't see it, or they're being absurd because they know what they're doing.
Right.
That's the big change, honestly, is you could have argued in 1989, we didn't know that we tilted this a little bit. Right. I didn't buy it then. But now it would be absurd to say, well, we didn't know what we were doing by not letting you speak.
Now it's naked. Yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
Let me ask you this, because there are opportunities for healthcare reporters, political reporters, those who cover taxes and the economy, to push back. Because you're right. What's happening now is the Democrats, the progressives, put out a piece of legislation, put out an agenda, and then the news media adopts all the terms, adopts the mission of it. And just a small example, again, because I'm the editor of Real Clear Health, I had a piece today. A CEO of a pharma company submitted an original commentary. And the first paragraph is all about the Inflation Reduction Act and how Medicare is going to negotiate prices to bring drug costs down. And I'm reading this and I'm like, well, no, that's not what the Inflation Reduction Act does. In fact, what I did was I went and I got the provision in the law, put it in an email, and I sent it back to their PR team. I said, look, I said, what this law does, it allows the Secretary of HHS to pick 10 drugs and then set the prices. And there is no administrative or judicial appeal to this. So essentially what this is that, and it's 10 drugs the first year, could be 20 or 30, going years out. I said, what this is not negotiation. I said, this is the Secretary of HHS setting the price. And their response to me was, you're right, Jerry, but the coverage of this, the language, the terms used is they use the term negotiation instead of price fixing. And my response was, well, so because the news media took the Biden terminology, now we're all supposed to use it. And again, it's endless. You mentioned the Mar-a-Lago raid. Well, according to the Presidential Records Act, any former president is allowed access to his papers including possession is a negotiation to hand these papers over, and he's allowed to have classified information. So, but no reporter pushes back. Anyway, I'm sorry. What in the old days, it seems to me, reporters, even in when they were still biased, they would still push back on government officials. There's no pushback any longer.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it used to be, you know, when you had a show like Meet the Press, historically it was one guest and 4 reporters, and it was like a press conference, and they all asked him questions. And now it's much more a pundit roundtable. It has a feel of this. And yeah, Meet the Press today under Chuck Todd is I'm going to have a Democrat on, and we're going to have a nice chat among friends. And then he has like Ron Johnson on. The minute that Ron Johnson says the media is liberal, Chuck Todd screams at him like a little girl. And it's one of those things where it's not the same. But even today, like we looked yesterday, the reporters in the White House briefing room were actually sort of pressing Karine Jean-Pierre on where's Jackie. But then when they do their reports, where is it? I mean, the New York Times had it on A14, but the networks didn't have it.
Right. Do you think that that's a case where you have the reporters who were in the room, and then they get back to the newsroom, and whoever is in editorial control says, no, we're gonna spike this.
This has been, I always say this, is that, you know, we have Curtis Houck here who watches all the briefings. And my maxim is always, well, we should applaud reporters if they ask something that's a good news question.
Yes.
Without fear or favor. That's a very rare thing. That is, anybody that says that now is probably lying. But if sometimes you'll get that in the briefing room, and then we'll say, okay, now let's see if it actually shows up on the program or in the paper. And most of the time it does not. Now, under Trump, what would tend to happen would be this. Bold reporter like Jim Acosta or Paula Reed or whoever, Peter Alexander, would yell at Trump. Trump would attack them back, and they would run the entire exchange because #resistance.
Yes.
And there isn't that now.
So which is the worst sin right now that plagues news and media generally? Is it the advocacy reporter, or is it the lazy reporter? Right? Because I think also folks in media are getting lazier. It gets down to this PR thing. They're unwilling to do stories on our own. Jerry and I have had this conversation within the context of radio, and you have radio newsrooms where the reporters are not doing any kind of they're not doing any investigative work or any kind of the journalism.
They're literally reading off the internet.
Yes.
That's their original news gathering.
There's a place for that. And that is, there's the type of reporting that's kind of giving you breaking, like the White House today will do this. The White House will have a hunger summit today. There's just basic reporting on what's happening. And there's a place for that. And the White House beat in general sometimes feels like that. I would say this, you know, we have many types of bias. We have listed them. Under Democrat presidents or Democrat Congresses, the dominant thing we watch for is bias by omission.
Yeah.
Like the Hunter Biden laptop. Sure. And now we have bias by omission compounded by bias by fact checking, and then bias by big tech censorship.
Yeah.
And they can uncork a narrative like this has the hallmarks of Russian intelligence, and they all repeat it like I know I'm an old person, like it's a Breck ad.
Yes.
And so on, and so on, and so on. We have videos where we can literally show you 26 people saying the hallmarks of Russian disinformation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so in that case, you have bias by omission, and then compounded by bias by dismissal, I guess you would say. This is, we're going to not acknowledge this as a story. And then when you try to assert it is, we're going to say, no, it's Soviet, it's Russian propaganda.
Well, this is exactly what Karine Jean-Pierre was doing yesterday. She kept trying to repeat this phrase, top of mind, historic event, in the hopes that this would go away. And as I said, I'm like, I took a small amount of comfort in the fact that she was getting pushed on this, repeatedly through this, to the point where I was playing each clip from Curtis Houck's Twitter thread on this the point where my wife asked me to stop playing the clips because it was just getting so repetitive. Yeah, I mean, this is the issue. Sorry,
Andrew,
Jerry, go ahead.
And Tim, at some point, because I'm sure that there are journalists who take themselves seriously. At some point, they must, because they have conversations, off camera with the White House press team, they must say to them privately, look, we're not going to be able to take you seriously any longer if you can't recognize reality in the press room. I mean, at some point it becomes ridiculous. And I think, yeah. What do you think?
I should state for the record, in terms of biography, I did take a sabbatical of sorts from the MRC and spent 2 years in the White House press corps in the first 2 years of George W. Bush for a Christian news magazine, World Magazine. And so the first thing I discovered about the White House briefing and the White House reporters was, these people are not really competing. They don't seem to be competing for scoops or to beat you. They went to lunch together. Terry Moran and David Gregory are buddies. And they all felt sometimes like a team because one person would pick up a question and then they would end up asking it 6 different times, sort of like what you saw yesterday.
Yeah.
I would say the thing I remember is, I'm going to go back to 1993. It was very early on, and George Stephanopoulos was doing the briefings for Clinton. And Tom Friedman of the New York Times, I want to say it was on the Washington Week, comes on television and he says, I just want to turn Stephanopoulos around and say, this is too serious. You have to do this and you have to do that. And you have to, I think reporters on some level are saying, yeah, you're not helping us Democrats. I mean, I'm sorry. These people all think like Democrats. They're all sharing the same political goals. And so I'm sure that what they're probably thinking to themselves is, why did Jen Psaki have to leave? This woman is so much worse at this. And maybe they say that to each other, where they're like, wow, she's really bad at this. Right. And so the same thing, you have the same token. And I would have said this when Curtis is doing the briefings, Jen Psaki, when she would screw up and say something obnoxious, it's like, that won't be on. Yeah. If you go back and you say, which clips of the Jen Psaki briefing is ABC, CBS, and NBC going to use? And this still holds true with Karine Jean-Pierre. You are going to get the most press releasey vanilla statements out of the press secretary. You won't get anything where she's fighting with the reporter.
Sure.
You're just going to get him. You're going to get the press secretary saying the White House summit is historic.
Yeah. Right. You'll get the very first quote where she read it verbatim, and then that's that. You're not going to get her saying, well, when you're president of the United States and you sign a bill for John Lennon, then you can. Which I just I got actually angry at that part.
Tim, let me ask you this question, because I know, look, my parents, they still watch the news in differently than I do. I know that my wife's mother gets her news really from the, Good Morning America, the early morning talk shows, that sort of thing. But let me ask you this, though. Are the American people, not just conservatives, but the American people broadly, those who might be independent, those who might view themselves as moderate, are they getting the joke that the media is a joke? Are they ignoring the media more? So we know the news is changing, more advocacy and more propaganda, but are the American people changing?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the public opinion polls on the credibility of the press have been going down the entire time I've been at the MRC. And, we've had one of our little triumphs was, I think it was at the 2004 Republican convention or Democrat convention. And they had one of these panel discussions, and Tom Brokaw of NBC at one point piped up and just said, Brent Bozell's trying to drive up our negatives.
Not a bad impression, sir. I applaud you for that.
Well, it got, now that everybody does it, it gets easier once everybody does it. Sure, but it is our job here. isn't necessarily to drive up the negatives. I had an angry conversation with Tim Alberta when Tim Alberta was actually doing a profile of Brent Bozell and the MRC. And he said, didn't you guys basically create the Trump monster with all of your media bashing? And I just take offense to that, because it's like what we're trying to do here is call them out when it's like you would claim to be objective, you're nothing of the sort. And the information you're presenting often isn't accurate. And as you already suggested, I mean, yes, we also see a really annoying tendencies like the Democrats passed an Inflation Reduction Act and the Republicans passed the Don't Say Gay bill.
Right.
You know, I mean, these sorts of just obvious, transparent things, you almost don't need newsbusters or conservative podcasts or websites. You should be, if you're politically sophisticated, everybody gets it. And yes, moderates get it. They know. Moderates knew that the media was in love with Obama. Saturday Night Live did a skit making fun of the media, asking Obama during a debate if he wanted a pillow.
That's right. Yes.
So everyone knew the press hated Trump's guts. You couldn't avoid that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think sometimes I know exactly what you're saying, because my wife watches NBC. She watches the Today Show in the morning. She watches Lester Holt at night. And then she's like, please do not comment during the story if I'm present. And sometimes I have to. It's just, I have to. But the networks still have large sway in sort of setting the agenda. You know, whatever you think about how they're presenting it, they're still telling you this is what the news is.
Sure.
And what the other network is doing, Rupert Murdoch's empire of influence, that's not news. So, we have to have this fight over how they're setting the table. And I think, yes, we've gotten to a point where Republican voters don't want any awful Democrat moderators of debates.
Yeah.
That's where we're going. They don't trust these things. They see that the media is out to destroy the Republican Party, because that's the sound of it. 60 Minutes had on Denver Riggleman, and he basically suggested the Republican Party was some sort of QAnon succubus. And and the CBS reporter goes, well, the Republicans would say, well, you're the opposition. And he was like, I'm not anti-Republican. I'm like, we heard what you just said.
So let's shift gears again. Last week, MRC celebrated its 35th anniversary at a gala that looked spectacular. I almost was able to go, and then last minute I couldn't. 35 years. Congratulations on that. You've been there for 33 of those 35 years, which is an amazing career. But let's turn our attention to the conservative and free market limited government world and how that kind of advocacy has changed. Jerry and I spent a lot of time talking about this. How have you guys changed, but also what have you noticed in terms of effectiveness and how the oxygen gets burned in the fire of advocacy? How has that all changed?
Well, some of it's the same, and that is, we're all communicating politically and policy-wise in tweets and sound bites and TikTok videos. We've had successful TikTok videos here. Bill D'Agostino is our video mashup genius. But that's part of it, and you always have to be concerned that, when you talk about policy wonkery, that in television or that in social media are pretty difficult.
Yeah.
And one of the big complaints I had about coverage of Trump, and we put this in our book Unmasked about Trump, was policy just vanished. They wanted everything to be about the stupid thing Trump just said by their lights and not about policy. And obviously a lot of Republican voters thought the policies were very successful, right, as opposed to now. But on that question, I mean, conservative policy wonks today have a much broader conservative media to promote their ideas in, that's part of it. I mean, Jeffrey Lord wrote a piece for us over the weekend, and he made this whole point about, about the time the MRC was founded, Robert Bork's nomination to the Supreme Court went down.
Sure.
And it's like, what if we'd had a conservative media infrastructure at that time,
Sure.
like we have now, and how much different would it have been then? So yes, on some level, you could obviously argue that conservative media is much stronger now. On the other hand, you could also argue, Washington and America is a much more socialist place.
Yeah.
Than it was in 1989.
Oh, Jerry thinks we've lost, by the way. Jerry is very Eeyorish about this.
What I've said, and it's true, that the center-right conservatives have lost every single cultural and policy battle, war since Reagan, since before Reagan. We have little victories here and there. We'll get a tax bill. We'll get something. But on public education, on higher education, on cultural issues, on family issues, health, on welfare issues, we are just we're not even successful here anymore. We're stopping the fall. We're stopping the fall of what the founders put forward. I don't think it has to be that way. And here's my example. So on this program, but also on my program, I've been talking a lot about how Republicans have been resting in terms of resting on Biden's flops and the economy and the inflation. Things are so bad that House Republicans are going to win by default. They're going to win. Yeah. They're going to win because they're so bad. And if you asked me 2-3 months ago, I think it could have been a wave election. Republicans could have had between 40 and 60 seats. I think now it's closer to 25 seats. That could change. It's September. Things can change in October. But that being said, they never put out an agenda. I know a couple Fridays ago, they finally came out with this Commitment to America thing. But again, on a Friday in September, and there was no media push around. I'm one of the very few conservative talk show hosts in the top 25 market who, outside of the syndicated guys, no one from the RNC pre-sold it or called me and asked for guests. I'm the editor at Real Clear Health. I've been asking the Republican leaders in the House, where's your healthcare agenda? And we have Healthy Futures, but they haven't given me anything on it. My point is that where are this conservative industrial complex, the AEIs, the Heritages, the Galens, the PRIs, the CEIs, the Manhattan Institutes? We should have policy proposals on the shelf to give to Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell or whomever and say, run, articulate this, go make an argument. And it seems to me we failed there, but that was I'm sorry, I filibustered, but I think we're failing in the war of ideas.
Well, I'm not as pessimistic as that.
Jerry is very Eeyorish, Tim.
This is sort of an internal discussion because I think Brent Bozell is with you. I think that he's very unhappy with the Republicans when they're out of power and even unhappier when they're in power.
Yes, I think he's right.
I always look. My job is to imagine the way liberals think. I mean, obviously, I don't have to imagine if I'm absorbing it all day. But when I always say to the youngsters here, I don't want to just say they're stupid, they're a commie, whatever. They're out to destroy this country. I want to sort of take it more on the level of what do they think they're saying, and they think they're very idealistic. They think that they're the ones for democracy and they're the ones for kindness.
Yes.
Wear T-shirts and coffee mugs that say kindness. I haven't received a lot of kindness from liberals. But anyway.
Choose civility.
So I would say the liberals are probably saying the same thing right now because liberals and Democrats behind their wall are tremendously pessimistic, even when they win. So they're going to start by talking about overturning Roe versus Wade. They're going to say, Jerry, how can you say you're losing every cultural battle when they overturned Roe versus Wade? So I try to always imagine it from their perspective.
Sure.
They're all sitting over there right now saying, we're going to get our clocks cleaned. They're trying to prevent that from happening. The weird thing, if you're watching network news right now, is we are not seeing stories on the midterms.
Yeah.
And you'd like to say, well, it's early. No, it's not early. It's almost October. And they generally don't cover midterms the way they, we're going to get more stories on the presidential race in January and February of 2023 than we're probably going to get midterm stories.
Sure.
And then the next month. It's ridiculous. But they're not doing so far what we would have seen, for example, in 2012 with the Todd Aiken, massacre,
Sure.
media-wise.
Sure.
Almost 100 minutes on the network news beating Todd Aiken to smithereens on one comment. And that's where you again say, so Todd Aiken gets 100 minutes and Where's Jackie gets 0.
Sure.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Right.
And that's where we are. Well, listen, Tim, we know your time is valuable. Thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was fun.
It was great.
I appreciate
fun.
it.
Thank you.
And now it's time for the bottom line.
The bottom line.
So, Jerry, I mean, you're in good company with your curmudgeonliness, with your being Eeyore-ish. I think you should take great faith in the fact that that Brent Bozell agrees with you.
Yes, and again, just for clarity, and our listeners know this already, but when I look at politics, when I look at our culture, what I see is that there's a counterfeit religion, there's a counter religion that is progressive politics, and we see these poll numbers where Americans are less religious. I don't believe any of it. America is no less religious. Our religion has changed.
Sure, I agree with that.
And so you have this growing kind of progressivism. I've said this before. So instead of going to church, we're having book readings.
Right.
Instead of having a Bible study, we're going to yoga. So we still have the religiosity and the spiritualism, but now instead of looking, God, other, self is now the God.
Right.
And this really is progressivism. It's
right.
It's self. It's self.
The
as
most
God.
important person in the whole wide world is you, and you
right.
hardly even know you. We talked about that a few weeks ago. No, I agree with that. And then the dogma that they take on faith. Go ahead.
And this is why, frankly, they can tell untruths, because the ends justify the means, because they take these things on faith. That's why Joe Biden can give a speech and say that Republicans are a threat to democracy.
I had a family member,
part of his religion.
I had a family member call my wife either this weekend or last week. I don't remember when it was, and wanted to talk about the so-called story. And I wish we talked to Tim about this as well, about the story that's been circulating about states that are banning birth control, supposedly banning birth control. And I'm like, this is just not true. This is not happening anywhere.
Right.
And I but again, this is someone for whom their political position has taken on this element of faith, this element of dogma.
Andrew, you have serious Democrats. Again, this is someone like you're in terms of this phone call. This is someone who's getting information from the news and everything else. Right. And when you listen to the news, you think that, oh my goodness, the Republicans want to criminalize birth control. It's a lie. But regardless, you can understand a little bit why they would think this, because they're watching Good Morning America. Right. However, where the real danger is, of course, is when you have members of Congress and you have senators, Democratic senators, tweeting out that Republicans, if they win, they will end Social Security.
Right.
They will end Medicare. No serious person believes this. It's not going to happen. So my question to you or to our audience is, when you hear a Democrat say that Republicans are going to end Social Security, when do we stop taking that elected official who says that lie
Well, we don't,
stop
right?
taking
Because
them
again, it gets
seriously.
back to what we've been talking
Well, they're
about.
elected over and over again.
Because it's well, no. But well, yeah, but they are, because again, we sort of refine these districts, so it becomes a situation in which you don't have a lot of, either liberal Republicans or blue dog Democrats, in office, and so, but to get back to what Tim said, or what we were talking about with Tim, which is his idea of the media should be responsible for challenging this, right? Yes. It should be the media that should be out there saying, well, wait a minute, you said this. And then, something, we didn't even get into this with Tim, and I'm sorry we didn't, right? Which is the problem of the fact checkers and the bias of the fact checkers.
Right. I love the fact checkers who say, well, what he said is inaccurate, is wrong. However, what he was thinking, we understand what his thinking
that's
was,
exactly what's going to happen,
therefore,
right?
It's not a lie.
Predict it with this "Where's Jackie" story.
Yeah.
In that the fact checkers, he said it, he looked confused. If you watch the tape, he clearly was looking for this dead member of Congress, but the fact checkers are going to say, no, he didn't really think she was there. It's a lie to say he thought she was there, because what he was really trying to do was celebrate this person, and she was at top of mind. And they're going to
change. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And again, we changed. The fact checkers have to change the facts and change reality.
And what'll then happen is, and then what'll happen, Jerry, is anybody who goes and says that the president of the United States had this slip where he thought that a dead person was supposed to be at this event, then anybody else who said this, they're going to come back. Someone's going to come back and say, no, PolitiFact or whatever has ruled that a lie. It's not true. And this is the problem, is that at some point in time, you need to, there has to be some kind of accountability.
It goes back to what we just said, talking to Tim, what I mentioned, and that is, the Inflation Reduction Act claims, those who support it claim that it will reduce drug prices because of this new Medicare negotiation. It's not true.
Yes.
And I actually confronted a pharma head.
Yeah.
And her response is, well, you're right, Jerry, but this is now the terminology used. Negotiation now means price setting.
Right. It's the redefinition of terms to suit whatever the political more is, which again is an article of faith. It's funny. I come back to this issue of faith without faith. And of course, having gone through the ethical humanist tradition in high school, which the simple definition is faith without faith. I remember getting into an argument with a Republican, and supposedly a conservative Republican, over whether, and I know I've talked about this before on the air, whether or not atheism was in and of itself a matter of faith, because you are articulating a faith that there is no God. And this person was sort of saying, well, it's not nearly as, destructive as, let's say the destruction that has been caused in the name of religion over years. And then I pointed out, well, Stalin was an atheist. Stalin killed 20 million people. to say that atheism, and then you look at China and the millions of people that have been killed in atheistic China.
Sure.
To say that atheism has not killed people is a massive misnomer.
Yeah.
So
interesting to end on this. I know we have to go. We're short on time, but there's this hurricane. People will listen to this at different times, but as we speak, there is this hurricane bearing down on Florida, and there's
Hurricane Ian
is right. And
I was going to say Liam, but I decided not to.
I did find it interesting this week. Governor DeSantis, the governor of Florida, was giving a press conference, letting the media know the efforts of what was happening in the counties. He had his team of emergency response people and administrators behind him, and he opens it up for questions. And a reporter said, well, the Biden administration is saying that you are slow to respond, and DeSantis said, wait, stop. That's nonsense. And what you're doing is you're taking politics and you're promoting a political view here. The truth is, here's what we're doing. You just heard it. You're seeing it. How could you ask a question that we're not doing? The Biden administration says we're not doing anything.
Yeah.
That it is plain that that's not true.
Yes.
So why are you asking that question? I think your question's inappropriate. I think DeSantis has the ability to push back on rogue media in a way that Trump supporters liked about Trump. But if you remember those COVID press conferences, Trump himself was his own worst enemy when it came to pushing back on reporters.
Well, listen, Jerry, I'm off the DeSantis train. I just got to tell you, because DeSantis is worse than Trump. At least that's what the media is telling me.
Of course.
Is that if Trump was Hitler, DeSantis is super Hitler.
Again,
no,
it doesn't make a difference. If by some miracle Mitt Romney was the nominee in 2024, we'd be back to
right. Of course, that's
Mitt
exactly
Romney. Is killing people who works for
right.
him
Binders full of women and dogs on dog crates on top of cars. Jerry, got a new show to recommend.
Tell me.
Reboot on Hulu. I'm loving it.
What is it?
It's a show on Hulu about the attempt to reboot a 90s happy sitcom and make it more edgy. It's got the great Paul Reiser. I know you're as big a Paul Reiser fan as I am.
I'm a big Paul Reiser fan.
Yeah. So we find out his daughter is the showrunner of the reboot. He was the executive producer and writer of the original show. And so some of it's about their conflict and some of it's about their cast members. It's Judy Greer, who was on Arrested Development, and one of the guys from Key and Peele. I always get them confused. Johnny Knoxville. And essentially the original premise of the sitcom was Judy Greer and the guy from Key and Peele, they're married. Johnny Knoxville is her ex-husband who lived with them. And then there's a step kid that all three of them are trying to raise. So now imagine it's 30 years later and they reboot the show and the kid's now grown up, but his mother still comes to the set with him every day.
Yeah.
And it's hysterically funny. I have enjoyed it. Also enjoying Andor, the new Star Wars show on Disney.
You know what? Star Wars has now jumped the shark. I think Marvel did the same. There are so many storylines and shows.
Okay.
And it's too much.
Here's the thing.
It's too much on top of it's like putting a log on a fire. It just the fire goes out.
In mind, right, is that for so long we didn't have any Star Wars stories beyond some books and the comic books. Yeah. And I think Star Wars is making up for lost time. And there have been hits and there have been misses.
Yeah.
I wasn't a big fan of the Boba Fett story. I wasn't a big fan of the Obi-Wan. I'm loving Andor.
You know who did this right? Star Trek.
Well,
did it right.
Okay. Well, but are you watching the Star Trek shows?
They had the movies, then the reboot.
Sure.
And then the programs. But the programs were spaced out and no pun intended. And right. And they kind of all fit together. It made sense.
But now I think
I have no idea what the hell's going on with Star Wars.
But I think Star Trek has also in some ways jumped the shark, right? Now that they've got, well, are you watching any of the new shows?
No.
See, there you go. But so I like Picard.
Yes.
I liked Enterprise for the most part.
Deep Space Nine was good.
No, but I'm talking about the modern ones. I'm talking about the ones that are all out now, which is Picard is good.
Yes.
Enterprise is okay. I don't like Discovery. I haven't watched
Enterprise. What is Enterprise?
So Enterprise is the one that takes place. It takes place in the prior 5-year mission before Kirk takes over.
Oh yeah, that's an old show.
No. Oh, there's Enterprise. There's the new one.
There's a new Enterprise.
Yes. No, Star Trek. What was that one? It was Star Trek. Was it Star Trek Enterprise with Scott Bakula?
Its first season, it was Star Trek Enterprise, and then seasons 2, 3, and 4, maybe 5. It went from Star Trek Enterprise to Enterprise.
Yes, but now there's a new
new Enterprise.
Yes, so it's the one with Captain Christopher Pike, and it's early Spock and early. It's good. I mean, there are episodes that I liked, and there are episodes I didn't like.
What network or streaming?
It's all on Paramount. These are all on Paramount Plus.
See, I don't have Paramount Plus.
Yeah. So see, this is why you're not getting.
I have a thousand channels.
There's a cartoon. There's a
have
cartoon one, Jerry, called Star Trek Lower Decks that I just can't watch. Because it just looks, I think it looks goofy, but apparently people like it. But this is, they're all doing this now that you have the streaming platforms, like, and I don't like, I've said this, I'm done with the Game of Thrones House of the Dragon.
You know what? Interesting. I watched episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5.
Yes. I
didn't like episode 5. I thought it was so rushed. There is the murder at the wedding, unexplained. It was just weird.
Well, it's
why don't you like it though?
Well, I don't like it because I don't think any of the characters are interesting. I don't think any of the characters are particularly sympathetic.
None. There's not one likable character.
Yeah, I don't think there's any action that either A, makes sense, or B, advances the story. I think when something interesting happens, they immediately pivot. So the episode before the wedding, for instance, I think I've talked about this.
Yeah, with the young suitor,
young kid. And there's something else that happens in the wedding episode. I don't remember. In the next episode where they time jump.
Well,
right?
Yeah, the king collapses at the wedding, and then they time jump. Is 10 years later, and the king's still alive.
And the king's still alive. And so, you know, but again, it's like I'll give you a really good example.
Flaw, though, is you hit on it already, but its greatest flaw is there's no one to root for.
Right. There's no one to root for. And also, frankly, I don't think there's particularly anybody to root against. I don't particularly care about any of these people. And I went over the weekend and went through the synopses of the first 6 episodes of the original Game of Thrones season 1. You know, and by episode 6 in season 1, Ned Stark was arrested. The imp was arrested and I think he'd already been on trial, or he was getting ready to go on trial. Jon Snow was firmly up at the wall. It was the episode in which the prince, the Targaryen prince, had the gold poured over.
We had seen Nightwalkers.
Yeah, and we'd see the Nightwalkers. That's right. Yeah. And so all of that stuff had happened by episode 6. And I'm like, what? This just. You're
right. I agree with you.
And I'll give you one more real quick example before we go. Like, we talk about the Crab King or the Pirate Crab King, whatever his name is, and the Triarchy.
He was a threat, and then all of a sudden, the king sends the troops, but then the brother goes and they're defeated.
And
that
we're
happen?
We're supposed to, like, I don't know, sometimes like the guy, Matt Smith's character, Prince Damon. And then at other times we're not. He's supposed to be evil, right? He's supposed to be like in the original Game of Thrones, he's supposed to be like Ramsay Bolton, who was so thoroughly despicable. But there was the one thing, is that he was a bastard. So, that you're supposed to sort of understand that this is where his mind goes.
Yeah,
he's cruel and horrible.
He was evil.
So
I loved how he died, by the way.
Oh yeah, 100%. Right. Again, one of these great scenes. And so, you're hoping that with some of these interludes, so have you watched the latest episode where time jumps?
I started it and I got bored and I stopped.
So there's a character that I'm calling House of the Dragon Rip, which is, so somebody, spoiler alert, if you don't want to be spoiled by this, turn it off. There's a night and the blonde princess's house.
They're obviously.
Yeah, he's obviously the father of her kids.
Right.
And he is very clearly based on Rip from Yellowstone, the greatest character on television today. And I'm not going to even get into what happens, but the point is, in the end, he is, again, they introduce a really interesting character, and then
they mess it up.
They mess it up. So anyway,
we got to go, but I'm gonna ask you this question.
Yeah.
So often on movie night, the kids like a movie. Sometimes we watch a movie together. We watched Elvis with our big kids, and we loved it. But sometimes Eric and I, we don't know what to watch, and so it's just 2 of us. The kids are doing their own thing, and we'll go back and watch Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Sure.
And so we've gone through it now twice. And I'm finding that the later episodes are so much better than the earlier episodes.
I agree with that. I think the writing got better, the attention got in. And I find the same thing with Veep. You should go back and watch Veep if you
Veep
can.
is funny. Erica hasn't seen Veep. That'd be a good series.
So let me add one, Jerry. Resident Alien, which you can get on Peacock, and Peacock is free.
Yeah. Resident Alien.
It's a sci-fi show, and it's about an alien that comes to Earth. He is supposed to come and destroy Earth, but his ship crashes and he takes human form. And it's about his adventures and misadventures. It's got the guy from, for those of you who don't know, it's got the guy who was on Firefly, Alden Tudyk. He did a bunch of things. We love that show. So we're
know what we need?
Yeah.
We need another show like Columbo or like Monk.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I'm watching the Rockford Files every day.
Oh, I love the Rockford Files.
Yeah. So
one of the greatest shows in the history of television.
Right. I mean, this is exactly it. So we're going through these episodes, and again, there's a couple of free streaming services you can watch it on. Like there's a free streaming way of doing it on Amazon. But it happens to be on our cable network 3 times a day, so I can just TiVo stuff and catch up on old episodes. So, and it's one that I hope they never reboot, because I couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
All right, man. So you have a show on Sunday.
Jerry Rogers show. We have some interesting new segments now. We do a Liberty update with theme music, and Brian Darling from our friend Brian, everyone knows who Brian is. He's a founder of Liberty Government Affairs. He's usually my guest during the update. And then we do this really fun segment now, Andrew, called Jerry's Just Right. And because it's my version of dittos. Yeah. You know how in the early days people would call Rush Limbaugh.
Oh yeah, mega dittos.
Mega, right?
Not mega dittos.
Yeah, and how that happened was because callers would just waste so much time. I agree with you. And he just said one day, hey, just say ditto.
Yeah.
And then ditto became mega ditto. Yeah. So now we have Jerry's Just Right segment where I kind of rub the progressives' nose in it, so to speak, about all the things, Andrew. And when we did this, we did this together. And when you were on WBAL too, you and I were always way ahead of the curve.
Yes.
There were issues where I was saying, don't do that or do that, and everyone was like, no, be careful, you're wrong. Only that we were right. So now I'm going back and I'm all these issues where I was right and everyone said I was wrong.
I love it.
I'm making clear how we were right on it. And
so Jerry's on Sunday. We've got the new podcast up, the Federal News Lunch Hour.
I watched on YouTube. I watched the first few minutes of the one you sent. I haven't watched it all yet. But I tell you the truth, I said this to Andrew off air, guys. How the show starts is great.
Thanks. We may be with that in mind. We may be making some changes to our start and ends here, which is
what's
fine.
It called again, Andrew? What's the podcast called?
Federal Newswire is the name of the parent company. Federal Newswire Lunch Hour, right now available on YouTube. Hopefully soon, wherever fine podcasts.
It's very good. I endorse it.
6 episodes in the hopper. 5 more episodes in the hopper, I should say. Jerry, what do you want people to do?
Find the truth, plant your feet, and stand firm. God bless you.
Have a great week, everybody. Have fun. And please, especially if you're in areas where the hurricane or tropical storm is, please stay safe.